Welcome back, everyone, for this next session. I hope you enjoyed your refreshments. Before we proceed, a gentle reminder to turn on the silent mode of your mobile phone devices. Now we will commence the final session of day one, which is sustainable practices in the aviation industry. This session will focus on eco-friendly practices that help mitigate environmental impact. And we'll watch as our panelists discuss sustainable practices, challenges, and forward-looking technology that's shaping the industry's future. This session is moderated by Amalina Jumary. Amalina is the Quality Assurance Manager with Avlaw Aviation Consulting. She has been an integral part of the company's audit and safety team. And in 2023, Amalina was a finalist in the Australian Aviation Awards for Female Rising Star. Please welcome onto the stage Amalina with a round of applause, and also welcome onto the stage our panelists.
Thank you, Leithen. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion of sustainability in aviation. My name is Amalina, and I am from Avlaw Aviation Consulting in Sydney. I am privileged to be back home today and to be a moderator on this panel. We are fortunate to have with us four very distinguished speakers. Firstly, all the way from Paris, we have Andrea Cortes. Andrea is the Senior Carbon Solutions Consultant at World Fuel. Andrea specializes in carbon markets and corporate decarbonization. With over a decade of experience, she advises Fortune 500 companies on carbon offset strategies, regulatory developments, and risk mitigation. Previously, Andrea worked with organizations like IUCN and ONF International, focusing on carbon investments and climate finance. And this is actually Andrea's first time in Singapore, so welcome to Singapore, Andrea.
Thank you, Amalina. It's a pleasure to be here today.
And next, we have Professor Ron Bartsch from the land of Down Under. Ron is the director at Dovetail Electric Aviation. He brings with him extensive experience in aviation, safety, regulation, and law. As a former head of safety and regulatory compliance at Cortes and an aviation law expert, Ron plays a key role in Dovetail's mission to advance electric aviation. Recognized for his contribution to the industry, he was awarded an Order of Australia in 2001. Welcome, Ron. Now, closer to home, we have Chiou. Chiou is the Deputy Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore. Chiou oversees air navigation services, unmanned aviation systems, and international relations. He is also the representative of Singapore in the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, for over 10 years. Prior to that, he headed the Air Traffic Services Division. Good to have you with us, teacher. And last but certainly not least, we have Vinesh Sinha from Kuala Lumpur. He is the founder of FatHopes Energy, which pioneers the conversion of waste oils into high-value biofuels. Under his leadership, the company has become a key player in the circular economy, driving sustainable energy innovation globally. Welcome, Vinesh. Vinesh, I think you might be the best person to kick off this panel discussion today to set a bit of background. What is sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So, sustainable aviation fuel, in a broad sense, is a fuel produced from a bio-based material that has got a molecular composite that is almost identical to conventional fuel. However, there are requirements around the world today that specify that it's produced from a waste-based material to strengthen its sustainability characteristics. And that's slowly expanding, but for right now, used cooking oil is the primary raw material used for SAF production.
Now, FatHopes Energy is the first used cooking oil collector in Malaysia to be certified under the ISCC CAAS. For the uninitiated, ISCC CAAS is the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification, which has been officially recognized by ICAO under its Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation CAAS. Now, Vinesh, how important is certification in accelerating sustainable aviation fuel adoption?
So ISCC primarily is a supply chain traceability certification, right? So that wherever the raw material originates, you have a thumbprint per se of the entire supply chain. So that's the primary objective. Now, to address your question in terms of the importance, every market has got different priorities. And depending on those priorities and the requirements of each market or each country, they either adopt certain certifications and they choose which one that is, or some prefer for it to be more open and have a carbon-based index as a benchmark for environmental performance. So importance is the certification processes guide the market in a certain way for ease of adoption, but I don't think it really accelerates adoption. It's more of a principle that is easy to adopt for adoption.
So it's good to have it, is that what you're saying?
It's a lot easier. You don't need to build your own framework when you adopt a particular certification process.
Now, FatHopes has been operating since 2010 and operates over more than 35 depots across Southeast Asia. Over the last 15 years, how has the infrastructure and volume changed in the production of biofuel from renewable feedstocks in Asia?
Yeah, so only in the past, I would say maybe 6-7 years has there been a drastic acceleration of adoption, and that's due to the lack of awareness prior to that, from the feedstock aggregation side as well as from the use case. And that has really come around. Sometimes we look at sustainability purely from an idealistic lens of reducing emissions, but as you have more volatility in energy markets, when you have more instability in terms of geopolitics, these energy streams pose as a hedge to conventional streams. So it's a convergence really of its environmental attributes, the current market conditions, and the push towards sustainability that have converged to increase the adoption of sustainable fuel in the past 5-6 years.
Thank you for that, Vinesh. Now we've heard from the SAF supplier. Let's move the conversation a little bit to a SAF distributor. Andrea, according to the World Economic Forum Net Zero Industry Tracker in December last year, despite SAF production tripling in a year, it still accounts for a very small proportion of total jet fuel use, indicating the need for more investment. Now, do you think the barrier for adoption is primarily due to the SAF being more expensive than traditional jet fuel?
Amalina, yes, definitely. I think the extra price that is basically 2 to 3 times higher than the jet fuel is the main barrier. And then the second barrier is that you cannot find it physically everywhere. But we at World Fuel have some solutions for that. The book and claim, you can contact us later, but we have solutions for that as well. But definitely, I think because SAF has to go through such a process to ensure the sustainability part, we need to trace everything from the origin of the waste oils up to where is the SAF delivered in the airports. Then that makes it more expensive. Also, it's not massively produced compared to the more traditional jet fuel. So that makes the prices still very high. But hopefully that might change in the future.
No, absolutely. It would be difficult for clients who are more cost sensitive to justify that extra cost, I suppose. Now, carbon offsetting, that's a more accessible alternative to SAF. Can you explain a little bit what carbon offsetting is about?
Sure, and for that I would like to Can you please show one slide? Okay, thank you. So first of all, one carbon offset represents 1 ton of CO2 that has been either reduced or not sent to the atmosphere, or captured and pulled down to the ground or underground by a project, right? And basically, carbon offsetting is a mechanism created to help individuals like you or me, or evidently companies, to reduce or compensate for their emissions, the residual emissions that they cannot reduce otherwise. And the way it works, just to give you an example, is that let's say each of us, by coming here today to this conference, we emitted 1 ton of CO2 by flying, for example. That ton of CO2 will be captured in, let's imagine, a project, a carbon offset project that has been certified and put in Colombia, or why not in Bali. It can, the project can be in different locations, and I will explain later why. But what is really important is that the projects are certified by a robust standard, what we call the carbon standards. And there are many of these standards, but some of them are heavily reviewed, and we can have high traceability and, let's say, trust, because they have been longer in the market. Some of them are Vera, the gold standard, which are the bigger by volumes traded. We have also the CDM, which is the oldest. We have the Climate Action Reserve, also, which is very popular in North America and Central America. Then we have some smaller ones like Plan Vivo that are actually very good as well. We have also a variety of technologies where these carbon offsets come from. So I believe you have heard at some point that carbon offsets might come from a reforestation, but it's not any kind of reforestation. It has to comply with several guidelines or rules that are given by these standards, and these projects have to be located in under specific conditions and must be audited. And the process for certifying a carbon offset project is quite lengthy. It's like between 1 and 2 years, because you actually need to do a whole technical documentation that the carbon standard is going to review, and also a third-party auditor is going to review like the documents, and also they will go into the terrain and verify in place that the project is actually removing or reducing this ton of emissions. So these carbon offsets are currently used for 2 main reasons, what they call voluntary, and I quote unquote, because in reality it's not really voluntary, because CSR and ESG is something that is kind of mandatory to do business now. I think you might have experienced now at some point that for making business with the biggest players, let's say Apple, Windows, Shell, British Petroleum, they have all in place sustainability programs that also make use of carbon offsets for their residual emissions. So we use them for the voluntary side of the emissions, but we also use them for the compliance markets, such as Cortes, which is very relevant for this conference, for the aviation sector. Cortes is having this compliant market, and many countries in APAC are part of this compliance market, and it's starting from, it's going to be mandatory from this year. There is the first sort of voluntary but compliance period starting this year. So that's about what a carbon offset is and how it works.
Sure, thank you for that. Andrea, how effective is...
sorry, I forgot something, and it's our little video. And I want to explain to you why can we put a carbon offset project in different places. And this is something that... Can you please put the video? It's a very short video. What you see in the screen is actually a model made by NASA, and it represents the CO2 emissions that are floating around the globe over time. And the red areas are where the major concentration of emissions are found. And as you may see, that moves very fast. And it's been said that 1 ton of CO2 moves around the globe in 1 week, so that's very short period. So it doesn't really matter where you solve the problem, where you put your carbon offset project, as long as it's fully certified under a robust standard, following best practices.
Thank you, Andrea. The question I was going to ask was, how effective is actually realistically carbon offsetting in sustainable aviation?
It can be really, really effective, and it's actually the only available solution to use right now for the residual emissions. And it can be very effective as long as it's part of a solid sustainability program where the company has already been trying to do some reductions by improving their systems internally. Perhaps using a little bit of SAF incrementally every year is a good idea to actually reduce the emissions, but then you will always have some residual emissions, and the only thing that we have available are certified carbon offsets for that. And carbon offsets, I want to mention, me as an environmentalist, I feel that they deliver so much more than only carbon, because many of these come from nature-based projects, and they deliver protection to high biodiversity size. We can restore areas that have been damaged thanks to the carbon markets. We can help do the transition from traditional agriculture to more sustainable or regenerative agriculture by capturing the carbon in the soil. And all of that are types of projects that we can fund with these carbon markets.
Thank you for that, Andrea. I think we've learned a little bit about carbon offsetting today. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about sustainable aviation practices. One of these practices is the optimization of flight planning and airspace. Teacher, what is green air traffic management?
Thanks. Hello. Thanks, Amalina, and thanks very much. And let me preface by saying that it's really nice to be here, really nice to be with you all. Green air traffic management, I suppose in a nutshell, is really about saving time for aviators, aviation, aircraft, and by saving time, you save fuel burn. And it is probably the only, in our view, the only operational means that we could do on the ground that can help aviation to become more green. And how do you do that? Now, if you unpack it a little, there are probably two pillars. One is airspace capacity. For every volume of airspace, if you can only hold a few aircraft, then it means spreading out the aircraft, and then therefore the throughput will be affected. So that's airspace capacity. And you can increase airspace capacity by, for example, reducing the separation safely. Then you can pack more aircraft in, and then this is done in different ways. One possibility is, for example, reduce vertical separation minima, and that of course depends on the aircraft equipage, right? And the second one is perhaps a little bit more difficult. That's called increasing the airspace throughput, the flow of traffic through an airspace. And here we are talking about efficiency. And for this, of course, individual air navigation services providers, they can do it, but the most powerful would be if air navigation services providers and air traffic controls can come together, and then they can work out the flow of traffic across airspaces, across air traffic routes. Then that you can really glean that kind of you can really reap that kind of efficiency, you know. So here we are looking at things like optimal cruise levels for flights. We are looking at things like improving surveillance, because once you improve surveillance by changing from a non-radar environment to a radar environment, then straight away airspace capacity is also increased, and then immediately also you can move the aircraft faster across them. And then there's also things like investment in air traffic management technologies. So that's also something that is important. So basically, in the second part, when I talk about efficiency, we are looking at, instead of an aircraft having to fly kings or having a step descent, we are trying to smoothen out all these routes. And then by doing that, we are able to reap efficiencies. Yeah, thanks.
I've got a question on what you've just mentioned about reducing the vertical separation. How do you do that while reconciling air safety as well?
That's why I said thanks for that question. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. So in the old days, before aircraft were equipped for it, say the aircraft was separated by 2,000 feet apart, But with RVSM, aircraft are suitably equipped, and we are able to reduce that to 1,000 feet separation safely. And there are, of course, certain reassurance, safety measures, monitoring as well, and that enables that to happen safely. Yeah. So in fact, it has been in place for a number of years, but there are still non-RVSM airspaces around the world, and that's really the focus. So we have to work. As I said, one important point is that air navigation services providers cannot just work by themselves. We have to work as a community. We have to work with the international organizations. IATA is one, IBAC is one, and of course the International Civil Aviation Organization is one, and then CANSO is another one. So all these are the things that we need to do, and we need to do it all together. Yeah.
Well, my background is in quality assurance and auditing, so I have to ask the question on safety. In the Singapore Sustainable Air Hub Blueprint published last year, CAAS will undertake 3 air transport management initiatives in the next 5 years to increase efficiency and reduce fuel burn. These initiatives are namely, number 1, advanced demand capacity balancing implementation, number 2, performance-based navigation enhancement, and number 3, gate-to-gate trajectory optimization. I've got a 2-part question for you. How do these initiatives contribute to sustainable aviation in Singapore, firstly? And secondly, do these initiatives require upskilling of the air traffic controllers?
Okay, so let's take a step back. And when we look at the Singapore blueprint, right, sustainability blueprint, there are actually 3 pillars. There is the airport pillar, there's the airlines pillar, and there's also the air traffic management pillar. Now, so for the airport pillar, we are looking at things like, for example, electrification. That's one possibility. For the airlines pillar, we are really looking at a lot on the sustainable aviation fuel. That's one thing. Then for the air traffic management pillar, which is what you mentioned, yes. In fact, there are 3 big thrusts, but there are really, really many little projects. Let me just talk about the first one that you talk about under air traffic management, and that's demand capacity balancing. Now, this is the one where we try to work with airlines and operators to say that, look, if we know that at a certain point in time there's going to be congestion, either at the aerodrome or along the en route airspace, or because of bad weather. If we can see that in advance, then we have a means to work with each other across the region to either slow down the flow or divert the flow. And then this avoids the need for aircraft to be held in the air for a prolonged period. In other words, while they may necessarily have to delay their take off at, say, a certain airport, but once they're in the air, they basically can make a beeline to the destination airport. So that's the first one, the demand capacity management, right? On a more microscopic level, demand capacity balancing can also be applied within the aerodrome itself, right? Within the, between the airport and the control tower. So these are also some measures. The second one I sort of mentioned already, which is performance-based navigation. Here's where we talk about suitably equipped aircraft being able to be given narrower spacing. Earlier I talked about vertical separation, but there's also the possibility to give them tighter longitudinal or lateral separations. So that is also a possibility. So again, safety is paramount in air traffic management, and you will hear us say that all the time, and we don't take safety for granted. In order to do any of these, then safety has to be assured, and there has to be measures, then we are audited, and then there are quality processes in place, right?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's right. here I want to talk a little bit about something called free route airspace. And here it's slightly different. Remember I was talking about flights that we try to remove kinks in air routes. Instead of a flight having to make, say, a dog leg, right? We try to smoothen that out. And today we are trialing something called free route airspace. Again, of necessity, it has to be a collaboration between air navigation services providers so that instead of flying point A to point B to point C, we have a means for flights to go from, say, point A to point C, and thus shortening the route, right? Yeah. The third area we talk about is, an example would be, well, when we look forward in the years ahead, ICAO is talking about this thing called trajectory-based operations. Now, of course, we are early days, but in that scenario, it is basically digital transformation of air traffic management. That's when the air navigation services providers, systems, will be sending data to the avionics, and the airlines also will have data being sent with the air navigation services provider and with the airport operator and with each other. And in that environment, then dynamically, airlines and flights can be optimized across the airspaces. So that is, of course, a long-term vision, but today there are certain building blocks that can be put in place already, and we are trying to move there. Yeah.
Thank you for that, teacher. I think this is a good segue to talking about initiatives in the sustainable aviation technology space. One of these technologies that have been discussed at length is the hydrogen fuel cell battery electric and hybrid electric aircraft. Ron, what is the technology that Dovetail is developing to turn existing airframes into zero-emission aircraft?
Thank you, Amalina. Good question. What we're doing at Dovetail is looking initially at 100% electric aircraft. So the idea with that is that obviously zero emissions. At a later stage, we're looking at supplementing that with hydrogen, green hydrogen and cells. But initially, because of the difficulties or the challenges in certification and regulatory approvals, we felt that retrofitting existing aircraft types was the most practical way of doing it with a pure electric motor. So what I might do to demonstrate is I've got a little video here. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so that's a lot better than 1,000 words from me. So I'll just put this video on now. Do I just have to push this button? It won't explode? No? Thank you. So that was our initial tests of a pure 100% retrofitted caravan, Cessna Caravan 208, in Seville towards the end of last year. And if I'd been speaking here 10 years ago and said that electrification will happen in the motor industry, I probably would have got a lot of skeptics in that. So you can see what's happened in the last decade in terms of improvements in battery technology and just the number of companies that are now manufacturing pure 100% electric aircraft. So what's the demand for electrification? Well, number one, in terms of the supply, it results in operating costs on what we've done with the e-caravan, as we call it, of a reduction of 40% in operating costs to operating it with a turboprop aircraft in it. The second advantage is obviously with the ICAO and the IATA supported net zero CO2 emissions by 2050, obviously with green energy, then an electric aircraft is 100% green. The the other aspect is obviously the dynamics in the price of fuel, avgas or avtur or whatever. And obviously, if you've got a good supply of green energy, then you're able to do that. But the big hurdle or the big challenge is obviously regulatory approvals from people like on the left-hand side here. But obviously, for this to be sustainable, it's got to be safe. And the difficulty with any regulatory approvals when we're going into unexplored territory is how do you get equivalent safety? And that's a big difficulty. We haven't got ICAO standards and recommended practices that prescribe what the requirements are in terms of battery and redundancy. So regulation is absolutely imperative for aviation, and it's the main challenge in where we go now. Can I have the next slide, please? This is the proprietary power pack that we have for the e-caravan, and it's been manufactured and it will be available for third-party purchase as well. And obviously the big questions are issues like fires on board aircraft from runaway batteries and that. We have addressing all those things. We've been working for the last 2 years in Australia with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and what we're working on is what's known as a supplemental type certificate, and that essentially means that once a STC has been approved by the regulatory authorities, it means that we can then go about the process of retrofitting an existing Cessna Caravan with a pure electric motor. And that will be happening hopefully at the beginning of next year, but we are looking at our first trial flights this year, and in 3 weeks' time we'll be in Avalon. We were hoping to have our test flight ready by that stage, but it'll probably be in the third quarter of this year for the first test flight. In terms of the capabilities of the e-caravan, the capacity will be between 7 to 10 passengers. The range just over 100 kilometres at this stage, with a speed of around about 300 kilometres an hour, and a payload of almost a tonne, so about 950 kilos. So not entirely dissimilar to what a Cessna Caravan can take now, but obviously it has limited applications because of the range, but within Australia and New Zealand, it's up to 40% are very short-haul operations. So anything within a radius of 100 kilometres means that it would be achievable using a pure 100% electric aircraft. The other aspects about it is, well, what would the practical demonstration of that be? I put this together around Singapore, and for those that are familiar with Singapore and have gone to the various different locations there, road traffic can be rather demanding. In the first example there, 2 hours 33 minutes by road, and that would be 20 minutes in a electric caravan. And the second one to Malaysia would be 1 hour and 43, and again that would be about 35 minutes in a caravan. So the applications are limited, but for those applications in which 100% electric aircraft are a possibility, then there are a lot of advantages. And having a 40% reduction in operating costs within the aviation industry, which is so price competitive, is quite significant. So we're really hopeful that there will be certain applications like skydiving, joy flights, short trips such as those that are examples here, and even in countries like Papua New Guinea, where a lot of the flights are by visual flying in the morning. And for flights there within 100 kilometres, they could be a viable option with allowing for battery recharge and the like. So that's what we're hoping to do with the caravan, and hopefully this time next year they'll be certified. And what we're doing with the supplemental type certificate, we're doing the production approval with CAAS in parallel. So as soon as an STC has been issued, we'll have production rights to be able to produce it and retrofit it for other places. Thank you.
Very exciting, Ron. I know you talk about that being getting its certification and approval. Does that mean then after they get Dovetail gets its certification and approval, it wouldn't be too far-fetched for us to imagine, say, holiday goers from Singapore to go to nearby islands of Indonesia, or even Vinesh coming to Singapore on a fully electric aircraft? Now, my question is, of course, it's about safety. How do you think the general public will perceive safety in this mode of commercial travel?
Look, aviation is generally regarded as the safest form of mass transportation. Regulators throughout the world, CAAS here in Singapore, CAAS and under the jurisdiction of the IATA with their standards, it is safe in aviation because it's highly regulated. And regulations and regulators are not going to approve any system design or new type of power plant unless it has jumped through all the hurdles. So there's got to be redundancy, there's got to be, it's got to be consistent with design specifications, and it's got to be able to prove that it can be what's known as equivalent safety. And we've seen how quickly the uptake of electrification has happened with motor vehicles. They've got regulatory standards in terms of cars, no different with aircraft. So I don't think there's going to be any issue with passengers appeal or the general public appeal, because they have been introduced through electrification through motor vehicles.
Now, this certainly has been a very exciting conversation. And to the members of the audience, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to scan the QR code, and that will come through on the iPad for us. While we wait for some questions to come, maybe Vinesh, just another question for you here. Andrea spoke about the costs being a barrier for adoption for SAF. Now, from your perspective as a supplier of SAF, how do you ensure there is enough SAF being produced? And the reason for my question is that according to IATA in December last year, SAF production volumes, it has gone basically triple, 1 million tons in 2024. It's double the amount in 2023, but significantly below their previous estimates. So yeah, how do you ensure there's enough SAF being produced?
Yeah, I think there are two elements to this in terms of the cost and acceptance of the more expensive fuel. One big bottleneck for SAF today is really the availability of the raw material, because it's prescribed. And we've seen this cycle a few times before, once in biodiesel for road traffic fuels, and second time for maritime, where regulators start by prescribing the most environmentally compliant material, and for right now it's used cooking oil because it's easy to understand and it's got a high carbon intensity reduction attribute. But as more and more raw materials are acceptable into the fold, you see the availability go up and prices tend to come down. So I think that's one big element of introduction of more raw materials. However, on the second component, which is really on the demand curve, Today you see companies taking pioneering positions where they have got environmental policies or commitments that they need to uphold, and they're using these sustainable fuels to meet those requirements. And as was highlighted earlier, it's not as easy as just buying carbon offsets and offsetting all of your emissions. You need to have an internal plan for carbon emission reductions within the organization or within the fleet before you can actually embark on offsetting the residual emissions. And F1 has been a very big example or proponent of such adoption of these materials. They actually have a requirement where if for every 1% of emissions cut, you are allowed to spend more on your R&D for the entire team. And you tend to see more and more of that come into the fore for the adoption of these materials. So in summary, really two elements. On the supply side, more feedstock or raw material coming into acceptance, and on the demand side, really more use cases where it's more important or more pertinent for emissions to be reduced given the use case of it.
Thank you, Vinesh. Now, this question from the audience, maybe this is more for Andrea and actually you, Vinesh. I'll start with Andrea first. The European Union is pushing operators to start using SAF more so now. What is happening now in Asia? Are governments also pushing to use it?
Not yet, but is coming soon. I think we have Singapore that will request the 1% blend of SAF from 2026. South Korea also will have a mandate from 2027, 1% as well. China is expected to have a mandate between 2 and 5% from 2026, and of a mandate of 15% by 2030. So we will see more and more mandates. This is not still settled. We don't know exactly if they are going to use exactly these percentages, but it is coming. It is developing.
Vinesh, are you able to comment? Do you see this happening now in Asia? Are governments also pushing for SAF adoption?
Yeah, there are quite a number of countries that, as mentioned, have already announced the mandates. Singapore is one of them, Japan's the other, and China. But apart from the mandates also, I think there are a variety of different incentive mechanisms that are coming to be implemented to start off as to incentivize use on a voluntary basis before it becomes mandatory. And I think we'll see more of that towards the second half of this year and definitely in 2026.
Thank you, Vinesh. At the moment, with the use of sustainable aviation fuel, it's using a blended gallon, am I right? So there hasn't been any approval yet for a full, basically, sustainable aviation fuel. This is a question more so for perhaps Chiou and Ron from a regulatory and safety perspective. How realistic is it for aviation to start using a gallon that is completely sustainable aviation fuel? Maybe we'll start with you, teacher.
Actually, I am not the expert on this, so all I can say is that aviation has very well established safety management principles, and the processes actually are very well known, as Ron will tell you. In his previous life, it's very well known that the processes are very well established. So if you go back to first principles, I think they are clearly established. Now, of course, it is indeed something very new. When we talk about electric aircraft flying, then of course you need to do a proper safety case, I would think so. And then there's the difference between a Cessna taking off from a conventional runway, flying along conventional routes, versus say an eVTOL, the air taxis, taking off in the city, overflying the populace, then that's a totally different safety case altogether. So I do think that probably we might have to take we cannot not do it. We cannot do nothing, but we probably have to take a more risk-managed approach. Yeah, I would just leave it at that. Let Ron take it on. Yeah.
Yes, look, I agree completely. New technology in aircraft and variants of aircraft, whether they're electric, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, electric aircraft, is entirely a very long and cumbersome regulatory process. We know how long it takes for new aircraft design, A380 or A350, for that to happen. So I think the easier way to do it in terms of taking smaller steps is to use existing aircraft design, existing operations into existing airports with the network structure, our route structure with that, and then doing what we're doing with a supplemental type certificate, that means you just have the existing aircraft type certification already approved and you're just retrofitting it with a new type of engine. And I think that's probably going to be the quickest way in which we're going to move into new technology and in 100% electric certification, rather than getting a new aircraft type certification from the ground up.
Thank you for that. Now, this is a question for everyone on the panel. How do you see sustainability initiatives impacting business aviation's long-term growth? I'll start with you, Andrea.
I think there are clearly some regulations coming, and I think it would be advisable for the business aviation sector to start to get in touch with these markets, such as sustainable aviation fuel, carbon offsets, which are also part of many regulatory or compliance markets, such as Cortes. So I think is going to play a very important role now and onwards, and it's best to start investigating and getting to know who can supply you with the right things, right? A trusted partner like us, obviously, like Warfield.
Ron, how do you see sustainability initiatives impacting business aviations?
I think there's two aspects that drives the industry, and that's profitability and regulatory compliance. And if something is more profitable, then it's a lot easier to get uptake. With regulatory compliance, you don't have the option. For example, when safety management systems were used throughout the world, everybody thought they were a good idea, but it wasn't until the beginning of 2009 when that was mandated by ICAO as a standard that airlines, every international airline in the world had to have a state-approved safety management system. The safety advantages were there, but it wasn't driven by just people wanting to do the right thing. It was driven by regulatory compliance. In terms of if there's a cost advantage in something, and that's the difficulty with getting net zero emissions to zero, there's not really the value equation in that at the moment. So sustainable fuels are difficult to get, and they're very limited supply. Carbon offsets is something that's becoming a regulatory compliant. But the difference is with something like electric, where you've got 40% reduction in operating costs and you can meet regulatory requirements, then I think the uptake will be a lot quicker.
Chiou?
Thanks. I think my reflection is that in the end, for the operators, right, whether it's BA, GA, or the airlines, the most important thing is there must be cost savings, right? If we are looking at green ATM, but it's going to cost you a lot more, I think nobody will buy into it, you know. But green ATM itself can save airlines operating costs if we do it right, and if we work together, not just one ANSP doing it on his own or her own, but really work across the region. And I think that is the difficult one. That is the holy grail of green ATM, and I got to say it is something that we are working towards. Yeah. I mean, we can talk more at Zouk, I suppose, but really, there's just so much potential. Yeah, but in the end, ultimately, it must benefit BA and GA by reducing the operating cost. I'm talking about green ATM. Thanks.
Vinesh.
I think for business, first thing is the first mover generally always has the biggest advantage. And the first set of emissions that is reduced is incrementally cheaper than the last ton of emissions that is reduced. So the early adopters of such technology will see that advantage in terms of differentiating themselves from other operators, and that's what we see now as the early adopters are coming in.
Thank you, everyone. So today's panel discussion, we've spoken at length about sustainable aviation fuel from its challenges in its infrastructure to its cost, and then we move to its alternative, carbon offsetting, and we've examined its effectiveness as well. We've also spoken about, pardon me, we've also spoken about sustainable aviation practices, green air traffic management, and we've also looked into the future and what's next with the sustainable aviation technology. So we are about to close the panel. Before we do that, any last words from everyone? Maybe I'll start with you, Vinesh.
Decarbonization is inevitable. We have to do what needs to be done for the industry, and I encourage everyone to really look for as many options as we have.
In terms of green ATM, I would say there are low-lying fruits, and we just need to look for them, and we look for them and work on them together. Thanks.
All I really need to say is buy electricity. So, and Amalina, thanks for comparing today. It was very good. You should ask your boss for a pay rise.
I just want to say thank you for listening at this late hour today. And if you have any further questions regarding carbon offsets, digging more in depth, or SAF, our team has a booth over there, or we can have a meeting later. Thank you very much, Amalina.
Thank you again, everyone. Can we give our panel a round of applause? Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Amalina, for moderating this very important sustainability panel. And we hope that everyone leaves today with a better understanding of the challenges that we face. And it was a very diverse panel. And the reason for that is that there is no single bullet, silver bullet. There is no single solution. There's multiple solutions to overcoming this challenge. So thank you, everyone also in our audience today, for taking the time to be with us for this very final session.